Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyoun Park from Amalgam Insights, joined as always by Charlie Araujo. How are you today?
I am great. You can see if you're listening to the podcast only, it's an incentive to watch the video. I'm wearing my Santa hat because it is the official start of the holiday
That's
Christmas
right.
season. We got through Thanksgiving, and I don't know, it just felt like we needed this year. I've got, of course, my um, automated background, but right behind me, we got our Christmas tree up. It's fully lit, and we're never this organized and prepared. We just felt like this was the year we needed it, so we dove into the Christmas spirit this year. So I'm good, other than being sick for the last week. But anyway, how about you?
Oh no. Well, if you are in the Christian tradition, this is the Advent season starting right now. So you've got your 4 weeks of Christmas coming up before the 12 days of Christmas coming after that. So basically, celebrate your Christmas, all month long. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm doing good. Just recovering from the Thanksgiving and Black Friday mess and trying to figure out what the heck is happening in this tech world as always. We thought it was going to be a light week to start with. And, for the most part, that seems to have been the case. But then we had a couple of major personnel issues, frankly, that seemed to have come up. The most recent one being some guy named Pat Gelsinger, who everybody in the tech world already knows, unceremoniously leaving Intel.
Yeah, breaking news. This just hit the wire right as we went to record this. I would say it's on the one hand shocking. Like this, it surprised me. Certainly, I don't think most people were expecting this. Um, and yet at the same time, there's not all that much to talk about. Intel has been struggling. It's certainly not Gelsinger's problem or fault, in my opinion. He's only been at the helm 4 years. This is not a part of the tech sector that changes quickly. This, building, making chips and building factories, it's a very long-term process. So I'm a little disappointed in this. I mean, I think Intel has been struggling for a long time. I think he was doing a lot of the right things. Um, I guess you could argue, and I guess that's what the board's position was, that it wasn't happening fast enough. But what I'm fairly unimpressed with from the board's perspective is like, okay, so you think simply removing him is going to solve the problem? That
Mhm.
it's not like they brought somebody else in. They didn't have, there's, I mean, all they did is introduce more chaos. We have split leadership and, no plan other than continue to do what he was already doing. So, right now I don't see this as a solution. I think we can agree that there's challenges with Intel and their ability to compete right now in the space. But I don't see how this is helping. Although interestingly, the stock rose on the news, so the stock market apparently thinks this is good news. But yeah, not sure.
Yeah, I find that a bizarre take. It's true that Pat Gelsinger wanted to spend a lot of money to pursue a strategic growth in a variety of areas, including the foundry business, where he wanted to make more chips and take advantage of Intel's supply chain. But it's not really a secret that when Pat Gelsinger came into the company, he was dealing with 2 decades of technical and business debt of Intel just sitting on its laurels and having become this bloated behemoth of a company. And that's a lot to fix. I do think there were a couple of strategic mistakes that were made on the Intel side. One was not fully grabbing onto the AI trend quickly enough. And the second being not fully taking advantage of the systems and platforms partnering experience that Intel had to be able to make it to the next level when Pat came in. I do think that there's more that could have been done in both of those areas. But be that as it may, it feels like Pat Gelsinger was on the right path in saying that Intel needs to go beyond what it has been doing. We need to take advantage of the capabilities that we do have as a US based chip provider and manufacturer and be able to work with those. But now, without that, Intel seems to be headless. It's a genuine question as to what Intel is now and to whether the chips and federal money that they're getting is even justified given like what they are now.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see what. Like I said, this is brand new, just breaking off the wire. So
Hmm.
we'll have to see if additional information comes out. But it doesn't, in my opinion, appear very well orchestrated or thought through. So I guess we'll see. On the
But
other
this is
hand, we
but
have
this is the time to do it with Amazon reInvent being starting up right now and hopefully taking all the air out of the tech world from Intel's
I,
perspective.
I suppose if that's a goal. But I mean the challenge I have is that should be the opposite, right? They need to be doing things that shake things up and get attention, not But whatever. And
Hmm.
so we, on the one hand, we have Intel now headless, and then Workday now sort of has two heads.
Hmm. Yes. So on a brighter note, Workday is bringing in Rob Enslin, who we know in the enterprise app space as honestly both a guru and a longtime expert executive. He spent time at SAP, Google Cloud, and then most recently at UiPath. But obviously, with his long tenure at SAP, the guy knows how to position enterprise platforms, which is exactly what Workday is looking for right now. They have long been known as an HR powerhouse, but they have actually made a bunch of finance acquisitions over the past decade across Adaptive Insights from a financial planning, budgeting, and forecasting solution. They bought Scout to get into the RFP and procurement business. They have their own analytics capabilities as well, but they aren't really seen as a financial player to the extent that Carl Eschenbach, their CEO, would like them to be. When we think of finance players, we're still thinking of SAP and Oracle first, not Workday. Let's be honest. So this is a good step for Workday, I think. But Rob at the same time seems to have his work cut out for him as someone who is trying to change the mindset of Workday.
Well, I think it's a huge hit, or not hit, I guess, huge challenge. It's going to be quite a shift, and I think it's twofold. I think Workday itself. I mean, I'm not a huge Workday follower. I haven't spent a ton of time briefing with them and over the years, but clearly from everything I understand, internally they are very much this AR centric. That's always been their angle, and that certainly shows externally that in the enterprise mindshare space that it's I think they have successfully created themselves a borderline monopoly in this space that's going to be very, very difficult to
Mhm.
break out of. So, I think it is if that's the primary reason that they brought him on, I think I agree he's a good fit. He has much broader base of both experience and connections, and I think can help drive some market credibility, certainly within the analyst community. Um, but is that going to be enough? Is
Mhm.
that's going to be the challenge, or what is it going to take, or how long is it going to take, and how much patience do they have, given what we just talked about with Intel? So I think those are the challenges. And I think Workday, to me, Workday's biggest gap is, or biggest challenge facing them. It's like I understand why they're doing it. It's a challenge of any company that gets to a certain size. They have to find adjacent markets to expand into.
Mhm.
Um, but if I'm a CIO today and going, wait, so you're trying to become the next SAP Oracle? Why in the world would I want that? You know,
Mhm.
it's like we rail against these organizations because they became so big that they were monstrous and we couldn't manage it. So that's I think to a certain extent, and this has nothing to do this has nothing to do with Rob. I think that
Mhm.
um, we're in this very interesting era. On the one hand, we're seeing a lot of motion towards the people, CIOs consolidating their investments in a handful of platforms, and I think that part works for Workday. I think we're also in an interesting era driven by AI where there's a lot of interest. I've just been talking to a bunch of CIOs recently, and 201, it was like, well, I'm wide open. If some small startup comes with something that's going to really transform how we work and can really show me to change it, I'm all ears, including
Mhm.
unseating major incumbents. So I think that it's a really, really interesting and challenging time for Workday. So I think it's a good move for them. I hope they don't have too high expectations because I think it's a long, tough road for them.
Yeah, one of the things I've always found interesting about Workday is that they do a lot of work with skills. Obviously, they understand the skill sets associated with each employee. They have their skills cloud, and in theory, you could create an ERP-like experience that is focused around augmenting skills. Now, I don't think Workday's actually done that, but they're one of the few companies that actually has the potential opportunity to do that. And if they could figure out a way to actually augment skills and then bring that to the business, I think that's a game-changing ability. And in theory, like you have skills, you have finance, you have a bunch of visibility into what the business is trying to do next. But that, that's a stretch. And it seems at this point, Workday is taking a more traditional ERP-ish approach. And to their credit, they are partnering more with other companies, and they have this extended capability to start building apps on the Workday on the platform, realizing that ServiceNow has been very successful taking that approach as well. So, they're starting to take incremental steps towards that next stage. I've given away my cards on where I think they should head, but we'll see what they end up doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess this is sort of a segue. Going back to, I think we're at this really interesting sort of junction point where we have all these sort of competing things going on. Because on the one hand, I just talked about the fact that I'm certainly hearing from executives that there is a interest in consolidating investments into these handful of platforms, and that works well for Workday.
Mhm.
Um, but if you look at what ServiceNow or Salesforce is doing right now, they are also, I think, giving some credence to this sort of movement that we've had recently, in which the focus is sort of shifting from the system of record to the system of engagement.
Mhm.
Where the system of record, there was an entire conversation on LinkedIn that happened with some of the folks that we know, um, about that sort of shift where it's like, well, it used to be that all the money, all the source of power was in that system record, the Workdays, the SAP, the Salesforces. And increasingly with AI, we're now seeing this shift away to this focus on the system of engagement. And so you sort of ask yourself, is Workday going, is this the right play for them going that direction, trying to effectively extend their system of record perspective? So, I think it's way too early to tell, and as with most things, it's there's not going to be a single answer. But it's a nice segue into one of the two articles I think we're going to spend most of the time talking about in this sort of off week. And this one, you shared with me, and as I was reading it, I was almost yelling at my phone because I was having it read it out to me,
Uh,
with my arguing back with it, because it's such a controversial um, piece, and the article is titled "The Zero Click Internet." And why don't you tee it up, and then I'm really curious what you thought of it, if you agree with it or not.
yeah. So this guy, Josh Tyler, he is a startup guy. He's a founder, and he took this controversial opinion last month on X. Basically, this long, sprawling, ranty thread, basically talking about what he's calling the zero-click internet. And whether you agree with it or not, I think it's an interesting phrase to reflect the idea that we are increasingly going into specific platforms and then expecting all of our answers to be within that one platform that we are using, and that you are not even going to search for new answers or click out for new answers. You are going to stay within a specific chosen ecosystem, whether that be Facebook or X or your enterprise application platform of choice, as we've just described with like ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday. So the real fight is increasingly, according to this idea, the idea that you will be stuck in a specific platform or a specific ecosystem and just never leave. And frankly, we're starting to see between some consolidation in the platform space, as well as some of these some consolidation in ecosystems, such as the Apple ecosystem. It is harder in some cases to leave these platforms and ecosystems. And I also think that so to some extent this is happening. And then with the emergence of generative AI, it becomes easier to ask questions within a platform and expect the platform to be reaching out to the rest of the world. But on the other hand, I would say that we still are looking for choice to some extent. So I'll start there and pass it over to you.
So yeah, so well, I think the important part there's I would say there's two points to this article, right? So calling it the zero click internet, and the first is a an observation which I think is difficult to argue with, but then his analysis of where that leads, and so as he says, or as you said, that this idea is that you now predominantly, I think, through Gen AI, you have this aggregated environment in which Google or your Perplexity, whatever it is you're using now, it's not actually doing a search in the way we historically thought about it, where you get the series of links and you go and click through. It's going to go and effectively read or surface that information and present it to you. Um, and in his mind, what that then translates to is then there are no clicks. You just get the information within that platform. And to your point, whether that platform is a social media platform or Perplexity or Google itself, that you're not clicking on anything, and that therefore that then dooms massive chunks of the internet sector, right? So he rattles them off. It's the end of digital publishers. It's the end of the domains and domain management companies like GoDaddy. It's the end of web hosting. It's the end of advertising business or internet advertising. It's the end of SEO. It's the end, and he goes on and on and on.
Mhm.
And here's where I struggle. So I am living proof of this model, right? I won't say I don't do any traditional searches anymore, but it's very rare. I
Mhm.
use a handful of different AI tools and I surface everything I need by starting by putting that question into Perplexity or I use an open source one as well, and it gives me a response. And I think here's where the reason I take umbrage with this and I disagree with some of the fundamental principles. That approach, I do it because it is so much more effective and so much faster. I can type in free text the question that I'm actually trying to answer. It interprets what I'm saying. It does the searches for me, often multiple searches. It reads through the web pages to surface the answer and gives me a summary of what those are. And if I'm simply looking for simple facts, which a lot of times it is, I'm just curious about something. It's like, who's in the cast of this movie or whatever. Well, yeah, okay. I don't need to go any further. But the reality is, I never would have. I mean, I might have clicked through to find that information, but I wasn't going to stay any time on that site. And if you were paying a Google link for that, then you just waste your money anyway, because I'm not buying anything. I'm not there long enough to watch any advertising. It was just a simple collection. And in the case where it's something more than that, well, then what am I doing is I'm using it to surface the stuff that's actually useful, and it and Perplexity and pretty much all of them now will annotate and say, okay, I got this reference from this piece, and so it helps me like instantly sort through. And then what do? I click through and I go and read it. And I think for anything that requires more than that simple fact, where there's analysis, there's opinion, there's subjective anything to it, I don't see any of this going away. What I do think, so web design, no. Do I expect that we're not going to have websites? No, I don't think any of that's true. I think we're going to still see independent content. I do think SEO is going to be at risk. I think it's going to be. I think we even talked about this AI optimization, right? I think that's
Mhm.
going to be a thing. But I really just, well, put it this way. I really hope not, because it will be a very shallow world, and I think that's the sort of doomsday scenario he's sort of painting here. Um, and I just don't think people will stand for it, frankly.
Yeah, I'm torn on this because on the one hand, I do think that generative AI is going to replace what we call like Google first page results. It's just as easy to search in Perplexity and get a starting point for what you're looking for. I still think there's a space for, call it the competitive market of ideas. What you do when you have an actual search and then you are looking through a set of results. And part of the challenge there is that, frankly, Google has crippled that capability right now. Because when you do a search right now in Google, your first six results are just ads that are not really the most relevant results. And so that's one of the things that Google has to think about, that they have over engineered their search engine for ads. And frankly, so have the social media networks like X and Facebook, like every third or fourth post you see is an ad rather than what you're actually looking for. So part of that is just a challenge that these legacy platforms have all over-engineered to simply become engines of commerce that don't really serve the advertiser, the vendor advertiser, or the user. The term Cory Doctorow calls enshittification of platforms, where platforms go from supporting the user to supporting the buyer to supporting the pure engine of financial transactions. That is a challenge that generative AI is solving. But this zero-click internet idea that this means we are going to wipe out websites, we're going to wipe out hosting environments, we are going to wipe out choice. I think that goes a step too far and more speaks to a competitive opportunity that exists for information.
I mean, I think there's a couple of question marks here that, and again, I get a little frustrated with this sort of ranting because it's not really kind of trying to take a balanced, nuanced approach to it. The first is that all this is only really possible in any meaningful way through generative AI, and generative AI is still incredibly prone to hallucinations. And maybe at some point in the future, it will get to the point where it's good enough that we can truly trust it. But right now, other than me asking some random thing like who's in the cast of a movie that it really doesn't make any difference, in which I can pretty much instantly validate because almost always I'm just trying because I'm old and I can't remember someone's name. It's like, beyond that, you're always going to click through to see who the authoritative source. And if you're not, well, frankly, you're being foolish. So we're nowhere near that point right now. The second thing is there is massive money involved. I mean, he rightfully points out that each of these industries are multi-billion-dollar industries, and these multi-billion-dollar industries are not going to go down without a fight. And a massive amount of the content that is generated out there, the reason there's a big giant market for ads is because most of it is produced in support of some kind of commercial activity. It's companies that we follow that are producing blogs and they're producing content because they're trying to attract eyeballs. It's individuals who are trying to put their ideas out there, like you said, the marketplace for ideas because they're trying to promote their own brand or their book. There's a whole lot of interest out there in having this. And if nobody can get access to my information because the AI simply consumes it and homogenizes and nobody clicks through, then guess what? I'm going to stop producing it, and then they're going to have nothing to scrape, nothing to point to, and no one's going to use it, right? It's a symbiotic environment that just doesn't lend itself to this sort of dystopian kind of world that he's painting here. So I think the bigger question is and like I said, that's why I broke this into two parts. The first part is true. The observation that we are seeing a fundamental shift in how people seek and perform at least that initial consumption of information is dramatically changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what will that then lead to? How will that then evolve or cause things to evolve? And I will say the one little part for me that is already changing is that, I was actually, as I was reading through this, and like I said, arguing with my computer as I was reading it, I was thinking about the show, right? Well, what do we do on the show? We post links to articles that we consume. What is interesting is I would say 80% of those articles are now fed to me because I am subscribing to newsletters that I'm relying on to surface that information. So one of my big takeaways is that the newsletter, ironically enough, the good old fashioned email becomes, has a sort of resurgence in importance because of this, because it allows people to bypass the filter. So I think it's gonna be this interesting time, but yeah, I'm not buying into this sort of view.
I think it's a half and half thing. There's definitely going to be activity where we stop using some of these traditional services and replace it with generative AI. And we've talked about Chegg already. Being that educational service that is replacing by generative AI. But also things like Getty Images. How much do you need stock images when generative AI will often produce the same level of stock image quality? Some of that is really going to disappear. But those are niche industries, and I think a lot of this worry about replacing graphic designers en masse with generative AI. That's happening right now to some extent, but I think that there's going to be a whiplash when people realize the quality that is available and the flexibility that is available for generative AI is not as great as CEOs who want to get rid of workers might want that to be. Uh, the reality is that for a lot of this AI work, there is a ceiling to the quality of work that can be done, and when you are at an expert level, that quality is obvious, both as something a challenge to use those tools, and then a differentiator for your own expertise.
Yeah, and I'm not making the case that we're not going to see disruption. I think we,
Mhm.
we clearly are. We always do whenever there's a major shift change in technology. We're clearly going to see disruption. I think that there, and frankly, if I was a graphic designer today, I would be worried. And I think we're going to see what we often see in this, and there's a spread, right? The 80/20, Pareto principle. That if you're the top 20% of your field in any field, you're pretty
Mhm.
much going to be okay because there's always going to be a market for the high end, the luxury, the
Mhm.
more personal, the custom, whatever. It's the 80%, the run of the mill that there's nothing really special or unique about it. Um, that's where the risk always is, right? So,
Mhm.
the question is, can you put yourself first in that first category? Or the second is, how do you then add a human dimension that can't be replicated, at least not easily? And so, I think there's that, but he's talking about this like wholesale destruction of the internet, and I'm not buying that. To me, the more interesting question is, how is this going to change? What are the pieces that are changing? How will it change? Like, I do think the domain name question is probably pretty valid. I think, there was a time where um, where having the right domain name made all the difference. But by the
Mhm.
same token, what did Chat GPT, GTP, hold on, I don't know why I'm subject. Uh, GPT just do? They bought chat.com for how many millions of
Mhm.
dollars, right? So, I think it's going to be this interesting dynamic that we are going to be in for a while of trying to sort out where this shakes out. And it's never as cut and dry or as, destructive as he's painting.
Yeah, and I also think that SEO idea is a little short-sighted in that if we are using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever or Perplexity to look for solutions, the next thing that's going to happen is that we're going to figure out how to optimize for those AI searches, whether that means supporting a certain level of indexing or a certain amount of traffic or whatever it might be. Maybe we are just finding that keywords have to be shifted into prompt based optimization. Or maybe we're going to find that we're going to have to play this artificial war of creating artificial traffic to our links that then leads to improved data outcomes or improved search outcomes. There's going to be some way to gamify the system.
Yeah, so here's what I actually hope. So I'm going to give you a non-tech, the opposite end of the spectrum, because I use it for everything. We're preparing one of the things. The old joke is, Mexicans, we make tamales every year, so we have something to open, right? and and so my family's always made tamales at Christmas time, and so we're actually planning with my wife's family to do it this year, and so we were like looking at different recipes for scale because
Mhm.
my grandmother's recipe has like no numbers on it. Just like, well, you get this and get this and
Yes.
get that. It's like how much? I don't know. Just and so we're trying to look at these recipes for scale. And so I was giving it very specific instructions, my perplexity of what I was looking for, and it surfaced pretty dead on the right thing, right?
Mhm.
And and I don't think this is anyone gaming the system. What were they doing? They were producing quality content that by having the right level and right quality of content that then was aligned to what I was looking for, it surfaced. And so what I'm actually hoping is that this whole idea of SEO, so maybe the SEO industry goes away in this regard, is that the answer is going to be produce good content. That if you produce good, meaningful, rich content for an audience, when that audience then goes into an AI tool and says, I'm looking for this sort of rich, meaningful content, you surface because that's what you're producing. So we'll see where this all plays out. But I always bristle a little bit when people kind of paint with this very broad brush.
Yeah, but no doubt that the minimum line of uh, the floor has changed from being keyword optimized to community building, and I think that's a respectable goal. If you're counting on people being names, just numbers and keywords, yeah, you're not gonna make it. 5 years from now, this is a time to up your game and to actually be engaging and meaningful to the people that you're trying to talk to.
And perhaps in the not too distant future, that community will be made up not only of actual people, but of AI bots as well.
Hmm.
The the other article that is a fun one that I want to chat about today is from MIT Technology Review, and it is referring to a research, I guess you'd call it an experiment
Hmm.
that some researchers did, and they created 1,000 software agents. So these were autonomous agents that they're using LLMs to play the game Minecraft. And this was all done by an AI startup called Altera,
Hmm.
and apparently it's part of a broad field I didn't know existed, but it's all in using this idea of simulated agents to model how human groups interact. And so there's a lot of very real world important uses for this. This isn't just someone goofing off and deciding what they can do with the game. That this is the idea is that this can be used from everything from market research to test ideas where you have these simulated agents doing things, as well as looking at projecting how society may react to significant changes in a culture, right? So it has a very significant real world impact, but they're testing it using Minecraft,
Hmm.
and it's absolutely fascinating. And we're going to post a link to this article. I highly encourage you to read it. But basically what we saw is when they got up to significant numbers of these agents, and they, like I said, they got up to about 1,000 that could be supported on this server, that you actually saw emergent characteristics, that they started taking on jobs. They did some tests where they planted almost like conspiracy theories, and what I think one of they created a religion, and it literally spread. I mean, absolutely fascinating, a little scary, and absolutely fascinating to see where this is all going. And to me, I look at it from the lens of juxtaposed to all this talk we have right now about autonomous agents and them taking action. This is obviously all living in a very enclosed world here, this virtual Minecraft world, but absolutely fascinating about what this could mean for, as we start extrapolating out where this is going.
Yeah, and to me, this went back down to two fundamental ideas that I think happen in general. First is evolutionary behavior, that anytime you get a mass of anything, call it cells, proteins, and you bring them together, they are going to work together in a way that ensures the survival of the whole, or they're going to die out. And when what we see is the survival mechanism. So it's not a surprise that a bunch of AIs are going to do something similar, in that if they are trying to create an ecosystem that is self-preserving and self-running, that they are going to figure out things like roles and assumptions and shared concepts, which then turn into beliefs, which then may turn into conspiracy theories over time as they evolve. And this conspiracy theory is based on an assumption that was made. And that assumption was made based on an activity that had to be done for the ecosystem to survive as a whole. These things build on top of each other. You can't just stop at the first level and not expect things to expand from that perspective. And that has broad societal implications, of course, but we should also expect this to happen in our regular lives. So this is going to be a second or third order issue that happens in general as we bring in more AIs, more agents, more autonomous behavior into our organizations. There's this unexpected second or third order activity that is going to happen. So I think this Minecraft experiment is extremely useful in warning us of what is going to be in our own environments in 5 to 10 years as all these agents and AIs keep improving and expanding. But there's a second
So
piece.
they
Yeah,
didn't.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
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 go ahead.
no.
I didn't
I'll get
realize.
to the second part later.
Well, I'm curious if this is related because the part that it didn't talk about is, as far as I know, that this was in a closed world, that it was just agents playing
Mhm.
with themselves. But I would have loved to have seen, or if there's a future experiment here where these agents are then interacting with humans, because I do think it's something we're not talking about in an enterprise context at all. But I do think will eventually be a concern as these autonomous agents start taking on greater authority and greater autonomy. And we're increasingly seeing the injection of personality into them. I do think there's going to be this open question about what is that second, what did you just call it, second order
Second
of
order,
impact?
third order. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, on the culture of the enterprise, right? Within your
Mhm.
organization, do people start reacting and interacting with them differently? So I don't know if that's where you were going or not, but I did find that to be like a really interesting question mark.
Yeah, and I think it probably helps. So I don't know exactly how these software agents were programmed to be in Minecraft, but I am guessing that they were programmed to be cooperative in some way and to have specific skills in the first place. And I think that it that is going to be an important piece of the puzzle. Right now, when we look at generative AI and most agents, they are trained to be positive and to be confident. But is that actually the right mindset to create a hybrid ecosystem and work environment? Or should these agents be naturally more curious and more doubting and willing to second guess themselves? We don't actually know the answer yet, but I can guess that if agents end up being confident to the extreme, that could actually result in some problems. And I think it's good to be able to test that in something like Minecraft, because my second point was that I think one of the important things from a business perspective in looking at gaming or looking at like sports is that you have a framework of rules that fundamentally can be tested. So when we use AI for things like chess or to analytics for moneyball things like baseball and basketball and football and soccer, we are able to figure out the metrics and the activities that optimize within a very complex but set rules. And that's always a helpful starting point because as we try to expand that AI into business or society or the real world, obviously the set of rules is much more nebulous. But we can start with a very structured set of rules that can get very complex simply by through trying to figure out which rules interact with each other.
Well, I mean, I think the potential around this, and to me, I think it ultimately will become this idea of, because even right now, when we're talking about autonomous agents, we are talking in this very narrow banded sort of view of it, right? But this idea of a true autonomous agent that sort of sits there and functions on its own has a lot of real interesting possibilities. I mean, one of the challenges I think that enterprises have is ferreting out all those rules you're talking about, and I
Mhm.
think agents like this can actually help you understand what those are because they have to live within those norms and can sort of surface. Um, and then, secondly, I think exactly in the same context where we can use them to create simulations. And we're already seeing some of this, right? But I think we're going to see a revolution in HR where we can start using generative AI, LLM based simulations
Mhm.
to really transform the way we teach people things like compliance and policy rules, right? Where they
Mhm.
can have a simulated experience that, no training in a multiple choice question, test is ever going to accomplish, right? And I do think it's interesting as we continue to sort of go down this road on both a societal level and from an enterprise perspective, where this may play out is that the CEO of Altera, what his big ambition for all of this is eventually to create AIs that can in fact interact and perhaps care for humans, right? This is like the movie I, Robot kind of stuff. Um,
Right. Mhm.
and it, the article sort of examined this question. It's like, well, is it possible for them to have emotions? And the general consensus is sort of two answers, right? One, no, and second, but doesn't matter. If the simulation is sufficient that you feel like they do, and that's what you're getting out of it. Is that going to be enough, and does that matter? And again, I start thinking, yes, we have things like taking care of the elderly, kind of a context, but there's also in, going to a contact center agent, right, where I can actually create this empathetic agent that interacts and has that emotional level of engagement. It could be truly transformative. And so, I think it's what I love about this experiment and these sorts of efforts is that it helps us look into the future, and it's like, well, where's this going to go, and ask the question, do we want it to go there? Does this make sense? What are the potential challenges with it? And I think there's a whole lot of it in this innocuous little game of Minecraft.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I would be really interested in seeing with this is that you could set up, scales of literal to figurative, like 0 to 100, or taking action versus like being more reflective, being conservative with your recommendations versus being liberal, or being really out there. And playing with these scales, or how cooperative are you with each other, from not cooperative, totally individual, to always helping out each other, and figuring out, like, using these scales to figure out which agent activities end up being most productive in these environments. And that might be the tone that you want to set in your company, at least for either for short-term or long-term gains, and then program using those assumptions as a starting point for developing the prompts or your agents in your company. You might find that something that sounds like being extremely cooperative might sound great in theory, but in reality, it means nothing ever gets done, or people end up using, like, kind of the lowest common denominator rather than the best idea. And so being able to judge, being able to tweak these settings and get the right tone for your company might end up being an extremely valuable competitive advantage over time.
It is interesting. I mean, I foresee a future. We've spent time talking about this idea of the digital twin, and we mostly talk about the digital twin either in the form of a technical architecture, or in the context of a process architecture, right? Where we're creating a version of it that we can then model against. But what is intriguing about this is that, so play this out, right? You have Copilot, you have a bunch of AI agents that are sitting there and they're interacting with me as an employee at a company. And as part of that, understanding sort of how I think and how I tick, and then sort of being able to then aggregate that. And I'm not sure if this is good or scary, right? But aggregate that across the country, where in effect we can create a cultural digital twin, where we
Mm-hmm.
sort of understand the cultural perceptions and biases and whatever that exists within an organization, and then run these simulations. And right, my OCM mind goes, wow, how amazing this would be to test.
Mm-hmm.
What if we take this approach to try to change behavior, or take this approach to make this transformation, and to see how the culture responds to it? I mean, the potential is just staggering, and like I said, a little scary, because we're bordering on this idea of capturing, the essence of the human psyche into these systems. But yeah, it is very intriguing.
Yeah, so I don't think we can simply recreate emotions. Emotions are extremely complex, but we can definitely recreate and generate traits or attributes. And we have metrics show, and variability capabilities to do a lot of specific traits. And if those traits, end up reflecting a certain type of emotion or a certain type of basic personality, yeah, we can say AI has a personality from that perspective. I don't think that is a human level personality, but yeah, we can basically create personality traits and generalizations. I'm fine with saying that is where we are at this point, and being able to translate those generalizations into something that can assist us or help reflect a better environment for us from a working perspective would be great. And the challenge, I think, is that there's going to be a lot of agent environments, frankly, that don't take all of this into account and may end up creating a more toxic work environment. I would not be surprised to see that happen as well, because there are unexpected consequences of having AIs that are this smart in our environment that we are not completely taking into account.
And I think, we spent a fair amount of time on this one, having a little bit of fun being a little bit more philosophical, but let's try to bring it down pragmatically for our
Sure.
CIO. What is the takeaway from this? And I think that's exactly it. I think that we have to recognize that what this is when you are implementing AI within your organization, it is not just another technology. And maybe not today, but in the not too distant future, there is the possibility that there are emerging characteristics that will come from that directly or indirectly within your organization. And you need to be thinking about that, both in terms of how you then drive adoption, but also what the ramifications of that adoption are, because it will change your organization's culture and the way you function, for better, for worse. And you should take an active role in deciding which it is.
Yeah, and as trivial or uh, ridiculous as it might sound for Altera to be testing out agent behavior and LLM behavior in Minecraft, I would not be surprised if this becomes an enterprise product within the next few years, where enterprises can bring all of their agents, LLMs, and other generative AI tools into a single test environment to figure out how they work together and if they are helping each other to enhance solutions and answers, or if they are actually fighting against each other and inhibiting progress. I think that is going to be a thing. I'm as we've been talking about this, I'm convinced that it is going to become an issue.
Well, I guess we'll have to check in another year and see if that's what's happening.
Sure. And on that philosophical note, this has been another week in enterprise tech. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this conversation or if you want to hear more, just like, subscribe, comment, and let us know. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next week.